Greetings, good evening, and welcome to the latest episode of the Pandemic Podcast with me, Dan Astin-Gregory. Thank you for tuning in. In this episode, I ask the question, who controls the future? And I say it as a warning, firstly, to the unvaccinated, but really it's a warning to all of us. It's a warning to all of humanity. Now, what's inspired this episode is really an exploration of some of the driving forces around some of the current events that we're witnessing, with, in particular, reference to things like vaccine passports, vaccine mandates that we're seeing in different sectors and different industries across the world. What is really influencing these policies and who's really pulling the strings? Now, this is a big question. And, when you say things like who's pulling the strings, instantly it kind of conjures up this thought of some conspiracy or some smoke-filled room where plots are being formed. But without going into that kind of level of thinking, I want to kind of explore some of the just understanding some of the economic history around world events and what's happening right now, because as I've gone through different phases across the pandemic, right at the beginning, I spent a lot of my time, the loyal fans will know, studying the data around COVID-19 and its impact, wanting to really understand the virus, how it works, who it impacts, the different risk factors, etc., and therefore the most appropriate policy ramifications. We looked at a lot of the different science, but as things have progressed and as the overall impact of COVID-19 has subsided, looking more so at the political, social, economic situations that surround this. And I've also been listening to a fantastic audiobook called Winners Take All by Anand Giridharadas, who I hope to get on the show, actually. And what Anand has looked at is the impact of the private sector on government policy, which is part of what I'm intending to talk about tonight when I talk about who controls the future. Because what you'll see across different forms of media is this reference to kind of the global elites. It's this mysterious group of individuals who, as Russell Brand says, are the kind of beholders of the bejeweled bus and controlled, and therefore have the most, the access and control of most of the world's assets. We know that there's a great inequality when it comes to wealth distribution. With I don't actually know the statistics off at hand, but we know that it's significant. The amount of the world's wealth is held by a very small percentage of the world's population. And that wealth doesn't just come with great riches in terms of financial independence, financial freedom. It also comes with a great deal of power, and it also comes with a great deal of influence. And what's been kind of gradually, like a boiling, the phrase "boiling frog." What we've seen over the years, when you look back over the decades, is this creeping influence of big business and these kind of global elites, the unnamed, upon government policy, and an enormous amount of energy, money, and time spent upon lobbying governments in order to influence policy, largely to grease the wheels of commerce, essentially. Now, it's fascinating finding myself saying these things, because I myself am an entrepreneur. I spent the last decade working with business owners, really to help them transform their ideas into reality, help them develop strategies that can help expand their companies, helping them to scale internationally, looking to help maximize their growth and profit opportunities. So I am someone who is very much pro-business. I'm very entrepreneurial and in favor of innovation. However, when it comes to the level of influence that certain individuals have, and certain groups have, and certain organizations have over not only public policy in terms of government policy, but over international and global affairs, is really quite shocking. So when I ask the question, who controls the future, it's very clear that there are driving forces that are pushing what appears to be this technocratic agenda forward. There's this deeply paternalistic sense that the parents, the parent organization, so to speak, know what's best for the children. And this is, I'm using this metaphorically, in that these global elites are taking this very directive, authoritative, um, paternalistic approach, where they are, effectively, nurturing is not the right word, shoehorning, forcing these global changes for the good of humanity. And the book that I've been reading, I encourage you to read it, Winners Take All, gives example after example after example after example whereby this is happening, and how many policies are influenced by these major institutions and these individual philanthropists. But what the essential point within this book that I'm reading makes is that it pursues this win-win outcome whereby the money and resources by philanthropists are put to good use. But the win-win is that there's always a kickback. And let's look at the vaccinations in the context of this conversation. Depending on which analysts you listen to, somewhere between 15 to 20x return on your investments when it comes to, if you're an investor in the pharmaceutical products like in vaccines, highly profitable products. Now, I bring this up in particular because clearly this is another example where individuals like Bill Gates, who's been quoted talking about how vaccines are his most profitable investment, you can see how this idea of what he calls, I believe it's creative capitalism, there's the term that he uses, which is the idea that you are creating social good through the investments you're making. But as a win-win, you're also making a great deal money on the upside of that investment. Now, the problem with this kind of mentality is that any of the downside risk, either medically, scientifically, or otherwise, is underplayed in order to maximize the upside profit of the investment. Now, quite clearly, we've seen over the last 18 months that there are cohorts and groups of individuals within with certain health conditions, certain risk profiles, who are at greater risk of severe disease when it comes to COVID-19 in the context of the conversation here. And therefore, some forms of medical intervention, whether that's vaccines or whether they're safe, providing they're safe and effective, would potentially make sense for those groups of individuals. But of course, that of the scope of profit is a limited audience. Now, I think, again, we'll see in terms of the broader scope of population. I appreciate lots of people got different views on vaccines, full stop, but we're not going to go into that today. But speaking of the kind of financials around this, looking at the idea of simply focusing on those small vulnerable groups, because the reality is, despite all of the fatalism and sensationalism around the fear-based projections around COVID-19, the reality is those people who are at serious risk of serious illness or mortality is a very, very small, thankfully, it's a very small portion of society. Therefore, if you're only looking to create a preventative intervention for those groups, that's a very limited profit margin. It's still highly profitable. You're still talking 15 to 20x return on your investment. But why settle at that customer base? Now, this is beyond skepticism. This is very real. I think this is a very real driving force behind one of the key driving forces behind what we're seeing in the world right now. And if you want a case in point around that, the idea, that these company founders, the stakeholders around it, Garvey, Bill Gates, the Gates Foundation, etc., put an enormous amount of resources into not only the development of these products, but simultaneously into lobbying governments in order to influence policy and to grease the wheels of these things happening. Now, I don't have the UK figures, but just reading this morning, not surprised to find that in Q1 of 2021, Q1 meaning January to March 2021, the pharmaceutical industry had record amounts of lobbying money spent on governments, record amounts for the first quarter of this year, record amounts of money spent essentially for the primary and sole purpose of influencing government policy. Now, lobbyists will say that it's not just to influence policy, but quite overtly, if you spend any amount of time looking at these institutional lobbyists, you'll see that it's all about simplifying business. And again, I go back to what I say about being an entrepreneur and as a business leader. I'm someone who does want to, in general, see a low amount of red tape, bureaucracy for business owners, and particularly small business owners and startups, so that there is less regulation, so it becomes easy to start a business. There's less red tape. There's less things you need to, administrative things you need to think about. And therefore, I am a strong advocate for removing barriers to commerce, to removing barriers to a free market. So this is like an internal conflict for me, because I've grown up believing that the free market in many ways offers quite a significant amount of solutions to some of the world problems, under the very sentiment that is being used, that I'm criticizing right now. Because this idea of creating a win-win, I've actually over the last 5 years worked with entrepreneurs and talked about a 3-point, which is how you can combine your purpose, your passions, and profit in order to build a successful business doing the things that you love and making a difference in the world under this kind of win-win mentality. And I still believe in that ideology. I still believe that if you can create a business that makes a positive impact in the world, then you do deserve to be rewarded for it. But when those rewards become excessive and exacerbate the inequalities in the world, but beyond just exacerbating inequalities, which I could talk about a whole lot more, because I also believe in helping to provide the foundation so that other people have an equal footing in order to stand up upon and carve their own destiny. Finding equality and outcome is very difficult, but equality and potential is a different story. But without getting controversial or getting into that depth, we'll park that one moment, but it's certainly a topic I'm keen to explore here on the podcast. But nonetheless, this idea that you can create win-win scenarios by making a difference in the world and being rewarded for it is a positive one. But when it extends the inequalities in the world, but beyond that, when it starts to then spill over into world affairs and how the world is governed and how policies start to impact upon citizens, it becomes highly questionable, particularly under this kind of paternal instinct that I've talked about, this authoritarian, technocratic approach where we are the experts, we know best mentality, which is the position that many of these philanthro-capitalists find themselves in. They're trying to solve world problems. They want to put their resources towards it. But unsurprisingly, they are the ones that are also taking an upside from it. So in the context of the mass vaccination campaign right now, taking it back to the idea that most people got on board initially when it was talked about this vaccination campaign to protect the most vulnerable. But as I've spoken about, it's really only a small percentage of people, probably less than 1% of people fall into that high risk category. So that leaves 99% of this untapped market. And as you know, if you're in the UK, you've gone from the over 60s and most vulnerable to then the over 50s, the over 40s, the over 30s, the over 20s, now 12 to 15, 12 plus. And Pfizer, looking at 6 months plus for their product. They are looking to expand the market to almost have this total market dominance of every person on earth being vaccinated. That expands your market significantly. And if you have to be very naive to believe that this is about protecting each other and protecting each other from COVID-19. You have to recognize the profit drivers and the power drivers within this. Case in point, I mentioned in the US, the record amount of lobbying money has been spent by Big Pharma in Q1 2021, quite clearly greasing the wheels for this mass rollout campaign where all of a sudden no politician is asking sensible questions. And you create this situation thereby where lots of people start to, like myself, campaign against the MPs. And I was part of a big meeting yesterday amongst other like-minded campaigners. saying how do we influence our MPs? How do we get to them to see our point of view, and what evidence and mode of communication can we use, and then how can we use campaigns to get more people to communicate with their MPs under the guise that the MPs have any sway whatsoever. To me, it feels very illusory. It feels like many of the decisions that are being that are influencing the course of the pandemic response right now are beyond local government. They're beyond national government, and many of this these institutional powers is what's driving what we're seeing in the world. And again, it's classic greed, transfer, at the heart of what we're seeing here. And what frustrates me the most about all of this is that, I've got friends and connections who are great campaigners in other areas, fighting for justice when it comes to, equality or equal rights, equal pay, all of these things, climate, all of these different issues, which at the heart of them they recognize is corruption and greed. Yet the same people make the linkage between the clear drivers of what's clearly dominating the kind of mass vaccination campaign here. Because when you actually strip it back and take it right to, does it make any sense? No, it doesn't. But the genius behind it is that it's been moralized. It's become, this mass vaccination campaign has become a moral duty. This perceived moral duty. The leaders have used this warlike mentality of it's now your moral duty, in the same way people were conscribed into going to war in the sense that it's their duty to their country. It's the same mindset that's been created. Therefore, you've created this R&M situation, and those that choose to not be vaccinated are somehow immoral or selfish, is the terms that are used amongst others. And it's created this vast divide. Yet at the core of it, is this greed that is pushing this market, the market forces forward in order to capitalize on this situation. It's just balmy. So who controls the future in the context of what we're talking about here, both in terms of vaccines and vaccine passports? Like the subtitle for this episode is a warning for the unvaccinated. Now, just speaking to the people in the United Kingdom, there are around 20 million people in the UK out of our total population across England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, who are not vaccinated. Now, some of those are under 18 and still in that kind of wave that's being pushed forward now coercively. And some of them are below 12, which undoubtedly, sadly, as I've alluded to, will be the next wave that comes forward. We're already seeing it in different parts of the world. But nonetheless, there is 5 million adults over 18 in the UK that have not been vaccinated either by choice or by whatever reason. But here we are at the precipice of vaccine passports. They've already been approved in Scotland. They've already been approved in now Wales, despite that completely flawed, undemocratic voting system where someone was unable to access Zoom or by phone to make their vote, which led to a vote being won by one vote. Now, democracy says, if you don't like the outcome of the vote, you can't then, carry on complaining about it. Well, you can be upset about it, of course, but nonetheless, this is a significant vote that is not about like putting a plant pot in your local park. It's about your civil liberties. Now, what these vaccine passports are already doing in different parts of the world, and the mentality behind this this false sense of moral duty, which is essentially being bought and paid for by these institutions, it comes back to the idea of who determines the moral compass. Historically, the religion would play a key factor, the churches, etc. Local communities would help, and the family values would be developed together so that you have this kind of moral compass. But the moral compass is essentially being hijacked by the same technocrats who are profiting from that ideological, moralized stance, which we're now seeing with vaccinations. It's a collective hypnosis, this idea that mass vaccinations are a moral requirement to access society. It's deeply shocking to witness this, and it saddens me and frightens me that we are in this position where you've got countries like Canada, where Justin Trudeau, is making statements on national television saying if you're over 12 years old and you're not vaccinated, You will not be able to access employment. You will not be able to go to school. You will not be able to get to travel on planes or trains. Therefore, if you don't agree with the policy, essentially, unless there's exceptions, you're trapped in the nation if you even want to escape tyranny. You've got bills being proposed in France, which is one of the first countries which is proposing to make the vaccine completely mandatory for all citizens. You've got these situations whereby the underlying need, the underlying risk is completely irrelevant anymore. It never, I say anymore, was it ever relevant? No, we've got this new moralized ideology that in order to participate in the new normal, in the new world, and the new world order, it's imperative that you're vaccinated. Now, so this is a message for the 5 million adults in this country. I'm a founding signatory of the Together Declaration. I'm a passionate supporter of this campaign, which stands firmly against a discriminatory policy. The reason it's called the Together Declaration is the sense that we have to remain together, whether you're vaccinated or unvaccinated. We are one human race, and that we must move forward together. But we've had 100,000 signatories. Where is the 5 million people that stand to be excluded in many ways from different parts of society if vaccine passports continue to be proceeded with in the United Kingdom? We're seeing it in Scotland. We're seeing it in Wales. There's already signs of it in Northern Ireland. England is next. So the reality of many of these things is people are essentially sleepwalking into the situation that they are finding themselves in. But I can completely understand. Many of you have watched me broadcast for over a year, every day for over a year, challenging these things. And there have been things that I've been politically engaged with in the past, but quite frankly, I was disenfranchised. I've largely been disenfranchised from the political process. I've been operating under a belief, referencing a previous point within this episode, that I can make a bigger difference outside of the political system, in the business world, entrepreneurially, in the way that I've outlined, through purpose, passion, and profit, in order to be making a difference in the world and be rewarded for doing so. But now I'm fully engaged politically and recognizing that there are so many flaws in the political system, and it's called the public sector, right? This is the irony. This is the sad irony. The public sector really has so little now to do with the public. They talk about public-private partnerships, where private industry is influencing public policy, government policy. But the reality is, the people who are affected by this, the everyday average Joes like you and I, none of us are average, by the way, I just hate that phrase, but the citizens of the world are the ones that are simply at the receiving end of whatever is decided amongst this technocratic elite through these public-private partnerships, through these industrial lobbies, and the technocrats get their way. And at the end of the day, the governments are given their marching orders by these proponents of power, the philanthropic capitalists, these great institutions, and wealth magnates and titans. And therefore, the public are just essentially at the mercy of whatever governments and these private institutions determine. So here we are at the precipice, the dawn of a new precipice here, where millions of people, not only in Scotland, Northern Ireland, but around the world, are going to be excluded from society, whether it's large-scale events, sporting events, concerts, pubs, bars, nightclubs, or day-to-day life, travel, etc., because of these draconian, authoritarian, technocratic policies, which are purely influenced by the greedy palms of the technocrats who are driving this forward. So who controls the future? People believe that governments are the people driving policy. It's really beyond that. It's really beyond that. But the challenge with all of this is, when people talk about the global elites and the technocrats, they are just loose terms. In order to really affect change, you need to understand who your target is, who you're trying to influence. And we know there are organizations like Gavi, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, etc., that play a huge role in driving policy in this particular context. But they're almost unreachable and untouchable when it comes to transforming policy. So firstly, we've got to get with the program. And the reason I told you about my own journey to being politically engaged, and there's a longer story there, but the reality is, political. If you look at the political party membership in the United Kingdom, it's at this all-time low. People historically used to pay to be part of a political party. They would have their say, not only through their MPs, but they'd also try and influence party politics through their particular, their chosen party. But party membership is an all-time low. So not only do we have this philanthro-capitalist influence on politics, this big business global elite influence on politics, we also have this complete removal of citizen impact upon politics by virtue of the fact that the kind of representative democracy is flawed and failing, and that party politics is null and void with such an absence of localized memberships. So, with that in mind, if most people are kind of sleepwalking, not really paying attention to political issues, as I was for much of my life, apart from certain key issues, then how do you really start to wake up and start to create change? Because what's going to happen is if vaccine passports do pass, all of a sudden people are going to realize, oh, look, I can't go to that pub, I can't get on that train, or I can't go to that concert, or I can't go to that gig. And people's response, other people's response will be saying, well, why don't you just get the jab? Well, there's this age-old right that's been long for called bodily autonomy, a human right of determining what goes in your body, which, like that, is going to disappear if the citizens of this world don't recognize that today it's a COVID vaccine, tomorrow it could be a flu vaccine, or any other intervention in the future, because you are opening the door, greatest sales aid that the pharmaceutical industry could ever dream of. Look what's happening already around the world. Look at Israel. Look at how the terminology went from double vaccinated to fully vaccinated, because double vaccinated doesn't cut it anymore. Double vaccinated in some countries is not fully vaccinated. In Israel, it's 3 vaccines now coming on to 4 vaccines. And so this is why you have this subtle shift in language. But think about that now. The booster regime could go on ad infinitum. For every failure that the product, but it's not deemed a product failure, of course. Waning immunity. Oh no, it's not a product failure. It's a business opportunity. The booster shots are the greatest. And the vaccine passports that essentially become a direct sales aid for big pharma. It's genius, but it's completely immoral, particularly when you brainwash society to believe that it's a moral duty to have however many vaccines the powers that be decide. Surely people are going to start taking this information and thinking, what on earth is going on? The reality is, for most people, they won't wake up until it hits them in their own backyard. And I say that metaphorically. It's the moment that you can't go on holiday. It's the moment that you can't go to the events that you care about. And you are forced then to a decision to either take the jab, which you may or may not disagree. Likelihood if you by now you're one of the 5 million that hasn't been vaccinated. The chances are you're choosing that or cannot have the vaccine for whatever reason, whether medical or religious grounds or otherwise. But all of a sudden you're then faced with a choice of letting go of all the things that you care about, the simple pleasures in life, like going to for meals out with friends or traveling the world. I say simple pleasures; these are privileges, of course, in the Western world. On the subject of inequality, let's not forget that. But nonetheless, these things suddenly will not be at your fingertips, and your access to society will suddenly be switched off like that under this technocratic regime, which is essentially driven by greed, under the guise of the common good. It's I can't believe how blinkered we've become as society to not recognize that all of this is greed at the heart of all of this, the accumulation of profit and power that is driving this forward. So who controls the future? A warning for the unvaccinated. Please pay attention. If you've chosen not to have the vaccine or you cannot have the vaccine, bear in mind that your access to society could be switched off in a heartbeat. Bear in mind, even if you have been vaccinated, one of the 40-odd million in the UK that have had 1 or 2 doses, the government's definition of fully vaccinated could go beyond from 2 to 3 to 4, and what impact is that going to have on your immune system? Who knows? Are you going to put yourself at risk of an adverse reaction? Who knows? But either way, this is what we are sleepwalking ourselves into. So the warning to the unvaccinated and the vaccinated is that we cannot allow this mission creep to slide in through the back door through these vaccine passports and these mandates. Now, there are plenty of people out there who have fallen for the fear and the fear mongering. They don't feel safe. In a crisis like this, of course, people's priority and their preference is for safety over freedom. But they are not a trade-off. They're not on the same axis. You are led to believe they're on the same axis. Right now, it's important to recognize that your freedoms are worth fighting for, and that being free is not selfish. It is a human right. And we should not be devolving as a society. We should be moving forward as a society. My wife has just walked in with my boy. I think my little activist is going to be joining us on camera. Listen to his crying. This is what little Zach thinks about these policies. It is worth crying over. Look at him. He's not crying now. No, he's happy because he's on the screen. Look.
He wants his bath.
He wants his bath. Daddy needs to go and give him a bath. Cameo from little Zachary Leonardo Astin-Gregory. See, he is mad at the policy. I told you he was. This right here is the future. What I'm doing right now, everything I'm doing right now, putting my entire life, my livelihood on hold. I haven't done anything in my business for 18 months now. At the same time of getting married and buying our first home and having our first child, where I should be prioritizing our own interests. This here, my boy there, is why I do this, because I do not want my young man to grow up in a world where he has less rights, freedoms, and opportunities than I did. How are we going backwards? So my message to you right here, right now, is that we have to say no to vaccine passports. We have to say no to every form of vaccine mandate. We're seeing care workers being fired. We're seeing healthcare workers being fired. We're seeing teachers being fired. We're seeing policemen being fired, policemen and women. We're seeing emergency services decimated in different parts of the world because of these draconian, authoritarian mandates that are driven by profit and greed. It's time that we all wake up. It's time that we pay attention, because right now we need to move forward together. We need to go hand in hand with each other, whether you're vaccinated or unvaccinated, and remind ourselves the simple fact that the risk of COVID-19 is predicated on your exposure to someone who is infected with the virus. We've been led to believe that we are sick until proven healthy, but the reality is the vast majority of us are walking around completely healthy, yet we're being treated as a risk through this false assumption of asymptomatic transmission, which no one seems to be questioning, because it doesn't matter if you go to a nightclub and someone's been vaccinated or unvaccinated. What matters is if someone walks in there with a full-blown head cold or a full flu or a full-blown bout of COVID, because that's what gets people sick. It's a simple message. Just take care of yourself, take care of each other, and let's not destroy society in the wake of COVID-19. Now, I'll conclude by saying one of my recent guests, Professor Matthias Desmet, who came on the show, is at over 250,000 views just on YouTube alone. It's an incredible interview. I encourage you to check it out. Matthias Desmet, he said that the authoritarian rule will eventually dissolve itself because it becomes more and more ridiculous. And look at this. As vaccine passports and these mandates move forward, you're seeing the army being deployed in New York into healthcare systems because they fired their doctors and nurses that were so celebrated as heroes during the pandemic, and they just dropped like that as if they're nothing because of their choices. There's no medical or scientific basis for this. So what you'll see is the story starting to unravel itself. At the moment, anything that could be determined to be derogatory or discouraging of the vaccine rollout is swept under the carpet online. But that can only continue for so long. This will begin to unravel itself, but we cannot be passive observers. We have to play our part and recognize the answer to the question, who controls the future? It is you and I. It's look ourselves in the mirror and recognize we are the leaders of the future. We are the leaders of the now. Every citizen must reclaim their right to play a part in governing how the world looks moving forward. We cannot leave it to these public-private partnerships, these technocratic, authoritarian rulers who have a plan for how the world will look over the next 10 years as nothing and still are happy. It's really about understanding that who controls the future is you and I. It's time to take the power back, and it's time to put the put the public back in public-private partnerships to make sure that citizens play a role in shaping the future. And I believe that off the back of this crisis, and there is this dangerous phrase that you should never let a good crisis go to waste. And there's lots of people who are really capitalizing on that. We've talked about one example or two examples or several examples through this. Digital IDs are another one off the back of the vaccine passports, where that $2 billion industry that no one seems to recognize is also in as part of this mission creep. But for us, as our citizens of the UK and of the world, our opportunity is to transform society for the better. And it is time that we start to see real change and come together, vaccinated or unvaccinated. It's laughable that we are separated and stratified on these lines. But we need to come together to actually dissolve inequalities and dissolve discrimination, and actually make the world a better place, and rid the world of poverty and rid the world of disease naturally. It's important that we start to recognize that ultimately what is missing here is our own connection to ourselves and to our higher power or spirit. I'm not a religious person, but I believe this miracle called life is connected by this spiritual energy that if you break it down, we're all made of the same vibrating things. Small particles, all of us, this miracle. We've lost our connection to ourselves. We've lost our connection to our source. We've lost our connection to spirit. And until we restore that, we are going to be the victim of this profiteering that dominates the world. It's time to really restore the values of love, humanity, and compassion. And it's down to us to do that. Who controls the future? You do. You do. We do together. And that's why I'm so supportive in this particular instance, this particular topic of this Together Declaration, which you can see behind me and on my T-shirt here. As a founding signatory, I'm very proud to be part of this campaign and help lead this campaign, where we're challenging deeply, certainly in these draconian vaccine passports. So there's a lot more that I will say about how we can control the future and change the future. But for today only, for today in this broadcast rather, I encourage you to sign the Together Declaration if you haven't done so already. You may ask, what's the signature going to do? Well, in the first instance, it shows solidarity. And in the second instance, once we start ticking away into the millions, then we have bargaining power, because ultimately the politicians do serve us and not the other way around. And the declaration is our way of showing that people have the power. So do take your time, for just a minute of your time, to go to togetherdeclaration.org. Sign that declaration, share that declaration, post it online, email it to your friends, send it by messenger. Get the message out there that we must join together to make the world a better place, and starting by saying no to vaccine passports, which are the greatest threat to our civil liberties and our human rights that we've seen in decades. So take a moment to sign the declaration and share that. And if you're interested in following the show, please make sure you subscribe to the podcast. Just take another moment of your time to go to danjgregory.com/pandemic. Just simply enter your name, email, and it will enable me and my team to keep in touch with you about future broadcasts and future campaigns as we become more active in creating the change. Talk is cheap, but ultimately, I do believe that awareness is the first step to change. And when I go to the protests and the march, I'm blessed to have so many wonderful conversations with people who have been following the show for a year now. And people tell me that, this show makes a big difference in terms of understanding the key issues that we're facing. And I do believe that a first step to change, but we will be taking further action. So please support the Together Declaration. Please join the Pandemic Podcast mailing list. And I look forward to seeing our next broadcast tomorrow. I'm off to help Lizzie Kernbell, our boy Zach. And then remember, that's what I'm doing this for. It's for all of our futures. And I hope you'll join me in joining the fight to make a better world. All right. Peace and love. I'll see you soon.